Hello and welcome to History Covered, the show in which I delve into the dustier corners of the past and unearth fascinating stories and people from history. I'm Angus Donald, a best-selling historical novelist, and today I'm going to be talking about the Great Wall of Denmark. During the Dark Ages, or the early medieval period as we now call it, there were many Germanic pagan tribes coexisting in one small corner of northern Europe. The place where the Jutland Peninsula met the mainland. Saxons, Jutes, Danes, Franks, Frisians, Angles, all these people lived there within a few days' walk of each other. So they're all packed into this small area. Let me just show you the map. This is the part of the world I'm talking about. As you can see, Jutland, and there's northern Germany there. All these tribes, we're talking about the 5th century here, were very similar to each other in their Germanic culture, their language, their religion. They made war on each other, they raided each other's cows and sheep, they stole each other's women, they married each other's women, they traded. They had quite a lot of commerce. It was essentially a melting pot, and I think it must have been quite difficult to keep to maintain a separate identity for all these different people. Certainly when we're studying the Angles and Saxons and Jutes in the history of England, we don't really distinguish between them. We kind of label them all the same thing. Some of these people, as I've just mentioned, Angles, Saxons and Jutes, went off to become English. This isn't really about them. It's about the people who remained in this part of the world. Some of them left, some of them embraced Christianity and stayed there. The Franks, after the Romans left, they became Christians, or they became Christians before then, but after the Romans left, they became the dominant power, fighting a long war to annex various other, the Frisians and the Saxons and various other people. This story, though, is not really about the Franks. Well, it is. It's about how the Danes became Danes and later Vikings and stopped being civilized Germans. So this is one German tribe. The Danes became Danes. It's also a story about a wall that divided a culture and created two new ones. This is the story of the Dane-Work, the Great Wall of Denmark, also called the Dane-Work, which has an important role in my novel, The Last Berserker. I've got handily, I have a copy just here for you to look at. This is The Last Berserker, first in a series of 5 Viking books called the Fireborn series. Anyway, back to the Dane-Work. It was a massive fortification, a huge ditch and a high earth rampart, probably with a palisade of sharpened stakes along the top, and several fortresses along its length. It was built over the course of many hundreds of years. Some work starting as early as the 6th century, or possibly even as early as the 5th century. But the wall was enlarged, improved, and completed by the end of the 8th century AD. When it was finished, the Dane-Work ran for nearly 20 miles across the Jutland Peninsula. From the inlet of the Schlei River, which runs out into the Baltic, to the Treen marshes and the Treen River, which runs out into the North Sea. So I'm just going to quickly show you a map of that. This is from the 16th century, but you can see the little red wall there is the Dane-Work, which separates Denmark from Holstein and Germany and Frisia and Pomerania and all those things in there. So you can see it's a rather charming map, but it shows where the thing from over here to here. Anyway, in its heyday, the Dane-Work was 6 meters high. That's 3 times the height of a tall man. And there was a deep ditch in front of the rampart that was facing south into the German lands. And that ditch running along here, you can see it actually on this map, was wide enough and deep enough to allow transport ships to travel from one side to the other. So ships could go from the North Sea to the Baltic without having to go round the top of the Jutland Peninsula, which was actually made it more efficient. You could also move troops that way, which was helpful for the Danes. I think it was most valuable, the Dane-Work was most valuable, clearly most valuable, as a formidable military obstacle, which prevented the powerful Christian Franks, who overran pagan Saxony after 30 years of struggle, from going further and invading and conquering the Danes. So they conquered this bit, but it stopped them going up there and conquering the Danes of Jutland. I would say that this wall was responsible for creating the Danish nation, which would otherwise probably have been subsumed into the mass of German culture. It probably would just be part of Germany. People say that the difference between a language and a dialect is a language as a dialect with an army. I think a dialect becomes a language when it has a wall to shelter behind. A physical barrier or some other kind of boundary marker can also create a nation. A barrier that separates two groups of people prevents or slows the free flow of folk and the corresponding muddying of identities. One such ancient boundary is the Dane-Work, which separates the Danish from the German culture for a millennium, which is enough to create different languages for different nations. Though, of course, it's now in Germany. The Dane-Work is now in Germany. Another is Offa's Dyke, which was also built in the late 8th century and pretty much still marks the border between England and Wales. Of course, there's Hadrian's Wall, the obvious one, between the Scots and the English, which the Romans used to separate the lands of the wild, uncivilized Scots from their soft, southern, civilized neighbours. This is what it looks like now. It's a sad shadow of its former glory, but you can still see clearly the line that marked Germany on one side and Denmark on the other side. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if the Danes had not built this great protective wall. I think they would have been overrun by the Franks. The Christian Franks had a zeal for proselytizing, and I think they would have taken the pagans on their doorstep as an affront and invaded and Christianized them. And that would have meant no Vikings. Without the pagan Danes, if they were all Christians, they wouldn't have invaded Lindisfarne, they wouldn't have sacked all these monasteries, it would have been very much against their religion. We wouldn't have had the Viking age of exploration, there'd be no Normans, and so no Norman conquest. It's almost impossible to imagine what would have happened if this wall had not been built. So basically this wall is one of those things that I think is incredibly important in history and yet very little recognised. The Last Berserker is available in paperback, ebook and as an audio from Amazon. Thank you very much for listening to me today, and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you on the next History Cupboard.